Imagine these mountains millennia ago, submerged by floods, and in this beautiful, biblical landscape named in the Old Testament, the shape of a ship.
Scientists finally entered the Noah's Ark site in Turkey, and what they found was not just another shape in the ground, it was something that seemed alive. Something hidden inside a place already surrounded by one of the oldest mysteries in human history. Before we go ahead and tell you what they found when they entered the site, and was it really alive, we want you to see these images. For years, people argued about the site from a distance. Some saw faith, some saw geology, some saw coincidence. But once researchers moved closer and began examining what was beneath the surface, the question changed. It was no longer only about whether the formation looked like an ancient vessel. It became about what was still happening inside it. A dead site should stay silent. A buried formation should not give signs that feel active, and a place tied to Noah's Ark should not suddenly raise a question that sounds more like biology than archaeology. The disturbing part is not that scientists went looking, it is that the site may have answered in a way nobody expected. Now the mystery is no longer just about the past, it is about what might still be present beneath the ground. So what did scientists find inside the Noah's Ark site in Turkey, and why did it seem alive? Durupınar Formation sits in eastern Turkey's Doğubeyazıt district, about 18 miles south of Mount Ararat at 6,500 feet above sea level. It is a 515-foot geological shape pressed into the landscape like a vessel. Researchers have observed, mapped, and debated it since the 1950s because from above, the outline does not look random. It looks organized enough to make serious people ask why. İlhan Durupınar did not find the site during a religious search. He was a Turkish army captain working on a NATO military aerial mapping mission in 1951 when the shape appeared in the survey images. The first people to formally document it were not preachers, archaeologists, or theologians. They were cartographers, trained to read land from the air. As one careful line would put it, the shape was documented before the claim became famous. Noah's Ark Scans now works with Arda İbrahim Çeçen University, Sivas Cumhuriyet University, Istanbul Technical University, and Andrews University in the United States. The academic side is led by Professor Dr. Senka Atilla, a full professor of archaeology. That matters because the current work is not just tourists pointing at a mountain. It is a coordinated investigation with universities attached to the evidence. Ground-penetrating radar has been used at the site, along with electrical resistivity tomography, LiDAR, infrared thermography, and an 88-sample soil chemistry study. These tools look under the surface, map shape, measure resistance, detect heat patterns, and test the ground itself. The important part is not one machine alone, it is the way multiple technologies have now been combined at a level of detail the site never received before. Measured length is the detail that keeps the question alive. The formation is 515 feet, or about 157 meters, which overlaps with the biblical figure of 300 Egyptian cubits, usually converted to roughly 135 to 157 meters. The alignment was not created by forcing the Bible onto the land. It came from independent measurement, and that is why the site remains difficult to dismiss. The mountain shape is real. The universities are real, and the instruments have already looked inside it. The next question is what appeared when the scans reached 13 feet below the surface. Andrew Jones moved the investigation below the surface. As founder of Noah's Ark Scans and lead researcher on the project, he used ground-penetrating radar to detect what appears to be a 13-foot-high passageway running through the center of the formation. The feature sits about 13 feet underground, and the team described its shape as something like a hall. GPR scans did not show only one empty space. The team reported a network of tunnels running through the center and along the inner edges of the formation's hull-like outline. The readings also showed angular features, with what appeared to be support beams and walls placed at regular intervals. For investigators, the strange part was no longer only the shape above ground. 3 distinct layers beneath the surface made the scans even harder to ignore. The team compared this to Genesis 6, where the Ark is described with a lower deck, a second deck, and a third deck. The radar cannot prove the biblical Ark is there, but the layered pattern gives the investigation a clear reason to keep looking beneath the surface. Jones stated the finding in unusually direct terms. Our new research has shown that there are tunnels about 4 meters down and about 2 meters high, going down the center of the boat and on the inside edge of the hull shape. We really believe that this layout, showing tunnels and also possible support beams and walls, would suggest that it's a man-made object and not just a natural formation. For the team, those 4 meters, 2 meters, tunnels, and walls became the heart of the case. Ground-penetrating radar can show density changes underground, but it cannot identify the material, the age, or the builder. A radar image cannot say wood, cannot say ancient, and cannot prove a man-made object by itself. What it can confirm is that the formation contains unusual subsurface readings. The passageway and layers are real GPR results, but their meaning remains the central question. The radar found something inside the formation, but the team did not stop there. They turned to the soil itself, and the numbers raised a second mystery. 2024 gave the Durupunar investigation its most measurable test so far. The Noah's Ark Scans team collected 88 soil samples from inside the formation and immediately outside the formation boundary. That matters, because this was not another visual argument about a boat-shaped hill. It was a chemical comparison, taken from 2 neighboring areas that should have behaved almost the same if the formation was only ordinary ground. The results created a specific problem. Soil inside the formation showed 3 times more organic matter than soil just outside it, along with 38% higher potassium and clear pH differences. Those details matter because organic material changes soil as it breaks down. If something once decayed inside that outline over thousands of years, the ground might still carry a chemical memory of it. William Crabtree gave the investigation its clearest scientific language. As the team's soil scientist, he said, "If this was a wooden vessel and the wood had rotted over time, we would expect to see increased potassium levels, changes in pH, and higher organic content. And that's exactly what we find. The important words are wooden vessel, rotted, higher organic content, and potassium levels, because they connect the soil result to a testable possibility." Andrew Jones also pointed to something visible above the ground. During the fall season, he observed that vegetation inside the shape turns a duller, more yellowish tone than the plants immediately outside the boundary. That does not prove what lies beneath, but it gives the chemistry a surface clue, because plant color can reflect differences in soil, moisture, nutrients, and what is happening below. The soil chemistry still cannot name the source by itself. The higher organic matter could come from decayed wood, but it could also come from natural biological buildup, drainage patterns, or geological processes. The difficult part is the shape of the difference. It appears tied to the formation's geometric outline, not randomly spread through the land. That is why the result does not prove the Ark, but it keeps the question alive. The radar showed unusual geometry, and the soil showed an unusual biological signal. But the strangest clue at Durupunar was not buried at all. It was sitting on the surface, where it had no modern reason to be. Marine fossils at the Durupunar site give the investigation its most physical biological clue. Preserved coral and shells have been documented in rock at 6,500 feet above sea level in a landlocked mountain region near the Iranian border. These were once living organisms, now locked in stone, in a place where no ocean has existed in recorded human history. Mainstream geology has a clear explanation for marine fossils in mountains. Over millions of years, tectonic plate movement can lift old seabeds into high elevations. The Himalayas and the Alps both contain marine fossils for this reason. So coral on a mountain is not automatically proof of a flood. Geology already has a long natural process that can explain it. Durupinar becomes harder to dismiss because the fossils are not standing alone. They appear at a site that also has an unusual soil chemistry boundary, a GPR-detected interior structure, and a measured shape that overlaps with the biblical ark dimensions. Each detail can be explained separately. The harder question is why all of them appear inside one boat-shaped formation. Two explanations pull the evidence in opposite directions. Either the coral and shells were lifted here by tectonic movement over deep time, unrelated to any human-scale flood, or they were deposited by a catastrophic water event like the one described in the Genesis account. The surface evidence cannot decide between those timelines by itself, because both explanations require very different histories. The phrase, "something alive," does not mean a creature is still moving inside the mountain. It points to marine life preserved in rock, at an altitude that demands explanation. This is the most direct biological clue at Durupinar, and also one of the most unresolved. The question is not whether the fossils exist. The question is how they got there. The fossils are visible, physical, and difficult to reduce to one simple sentence. But the investigation's biggest complication comes from the man who studied this site seriously, and what happened to his reputation afterward. Noah's Ark Scans has built its investigation around tools that can look inside the formation without tearing it apart. GPR detects density changes beneath the ground, while ERT maps differences in underground material. LiDAR gives the team precise 3D surface geometry, and infrared thermography looks for temperature differences that may point to hidden voids or material changes below the surface. Archaeology is the reason the team says it has to move carefully. Their position is simple. Archaeology is destructive. Once material is removed, it cannot simply be put back into place. That is why geophysical scans and core drilling have to come before full excavation. If something important is inside the formation, digging too early could destroy part of the very record they are trying to understand. Turkey has also placed a hard limit around the work. The Durupinar Formation is a protected site, which means researchers cannot simply open the ground wherever they want. That matters because the most direct test has not happened yet. Full excavation could expose whatever the radar is detecting, and radiocarbon dating could test any organic material found inside. Radiocarbon dating is the missing step that could change everything. If organic material from the radar-detected passageway dated to around 5,000 years, matching flood period dating used by supporters of the Ark theory, it would be a massive archaeological moment. If the date came back much older, younger, or unrelated, it could push the case in the opposite direction just as strongly. 2025 and 2026 are now the years the team is watching. The plan is to use core drilling, a more controlled method that removes narrow cylindrical samples instead of opening the whole site. Those samples could finally provide material for lab testing. But until those results exist, the investigation remains powerful, limited, and unfinished. The tools can see patterns, but they still cannot deliver the final answer. Before the next test goes deeper, the investigation has to face the man who once believed this site was the Ark, then changed his mind completely. David Fasold became the strongest early voice for the Durupinar site. As a marine salvage expert, he was not just another believer looking at a strange mountain from a distance. During the 1980s and early 1990s, he argued the formation was the fossilized remains of Noah's Ark, even publishing a full book-length investigation. His confidence brought attention, public interest, and funding for deeper work at the site. Between 1988 and 1994, Fasold went far beyond surface claims. He joined multiple expeditions that included drilling and physical excavation, making his work one of the most direct investigations of the formation's interior. He was not relying only on photographs, legends, or remote sensing data. He had actual samples from the ground, which makes his later reversal much harder to ignore. September 1994 became the turning point. Fasold visited the site with Australian geologist Ian Plimer, and after years of believing, he concluded it was not a boat. His new view was that ancient peoples may have mistaken the site for the Ark because of its shape and location. That matters because the reversal came from someone who wanted the evidence to be true. In 1996, Fasold co-authored a paper with geologist Lawrence Collins titled Bogus Noah's Ark from Turkey Exposed as a Common Geologic Structure. The paper became the most cited skeptical challenge in the Durupınar literature. It argued the formation was a natural syncline and that the nearby so-called anchor stones were local volcanic rock with naturally chamfered holes. Fasold's reversal is the credibility checkpoint every new claim has to face. He was motivated to believe, had practical skills, gained rare access, and changed his mind after the most serious physical investigation the site had received. The current team now returns with GPR, soil chemistry, and newer imaging tools Fasold never had. The question is whether better technology changes the answer he reached. Fasold changed his mind after touching the evidence directly. Now the investigation has to face the geological explanation he believed could explain the whole formation. Mainstream geology gives the strongest published explanation for the Durupınar formation. Geologists describe it as a syncline, a fold, where rock layers dip inward toward a central line. In this reading, landslides, mudflow, and erosion shaped the boat-like outline over time. Earlier internal structures are explained as natural fractures or mineral concentrations of limonite and magnetite, not beams or walls. Lawrence Collins and Andrew Snelling make that conclusion harder to ignore because they come from opposite sides of the debate. Collins is known as an anti-creationist, while Snelling is a young Earth creationist. On most biblical geology questions, they would not be expected to agree. But both independently concluded that Durupınar is a natural geological structure, which gives the skeptical case unusual weight. Eşref Atabey, a Turkish geological engineer from the General Directorate of Mineral Research and Exploration, reached the same basic conclusion. Over the decades, the site has been examined by Turkish, American, and Australian geological authorities, and none have endorsed the Ark hypothesis. That matters because the mainstream position is not based on one critic or one paper. It comes from repeated geological assessments. 2024 soil chemistry is the detail the mainstream explanation has not fully answered in a published site-specific analysis. The question is why soil inside the formation boundary contains 3 times more organic matter and 38% more potassium than soil immediately outside it. A syncline may explain the shape, the rock, and even some internal patterns, but it does not automatically explain a chemical difference so tightly tied to the outline. The brighter side of news captured the wider caution around Ark claims. Noah's Ark claims have surfaced again and again since the 1800s, especially around Mount Ararat. Reports of beams, ship shapes, and buried remnants have repeatedly fallen apart under scrutiny. That warning matters. The current investigation is entering a field where many claims looked strong before peer review tested them. The geological explanation is strong, and Fasold's reversal makes it stronger. But the soil chemistry still leaves one specific question open, and the next step is weighing all 3 explanations side by side. Mainstream geology gives the most supported reading of the scans. In this view, Durupınar is a natural syncline shaped by mudflow, tectonic activity, and erosion over time. The GPR anomalies are explained as density contrasts in limonite, magnetite, and fractured rock, not walls or beams. The soil difference may come from drainage or biological buildup, and the marine fossils would be the result of plate uplift over millions of years. Proponent interpretation sees the same data differently. The soil chemistry change is not scattered randomly across the hillside. It appears tied to the geometric outline of the formation. The radar also shows angular shapes and organized interior patterns that supporters say do not look like ordinary voids in a syncline. Add the arc-like length and the location near Ararat, and they argue the site deserves formal excavation and radiocarbon testing before anyone calls the case closed. Speculative version is the weakest reading. It claims the formation already contains an intact or mostly preserved wooden vessel, but the current evidence does not go that far. The team itself admits core drilling and eventually excavation would be needed for confirmation. As the most careful version would say, no current scan data proves an artificial structure. Non-destructive methods can point to unusual patterns, but they cannot alone prove ancient human construction. Noah's Ark being confirmed here would mean something enormous, but only if the evidence reached that level. It would become the most significant archaeological confirmation of a biblical narrative in recorded history, with scientific, religious, and historical consequences at the same time. A discovery like that would not only affect one side in Turkey, it would force scholars, believers, and skeptics to re-examine one of the oldest flood accounts in the world. Honest position holds both sides without forcing a false ending. The evidence gathered between 2021 and 2025 is more detailed than anything previously applied to Durupinar, and it has produced anomalies not yet fully addressed in peer-reviewed literature. But the mainstream geological case remains strong. The question is not settled in either direction, and the pending core drilling is the most important near-term test. The evidence does not confirm the Ark, but it also does not erase every anomaly. The most realistic answer sits between belief and dismissal, and that is where the next part of the investigation has to go. Durupinar Formation most likely remains, by the weight of published evidence, a natural syncline rather than a man-made vessel. Its boat-like shape, its position near Mount Ararat, and even its unusual soil may still come from natural processes working together over time. That is the conclusion supported by the most credentialed investigators who physically engaged with the site's material, and by mainstream Turkish, American, and Australian geological authorities. 2024 changed the discussion because the current team has data earlier investigators did not have. The 88-sample soil chemistry study, the reported GPR passageway, the three-layer structure, and the combined use of ERT, LiDAR, and infrared thermography create a new evidence package. None of that existed when Fasold reversed in 1994. Whether it changes the old conclusion depends on peer-reviewed analysis that has not yet arrived. Turkey is the reason the question cannot simply be settled with a shovel. The site's protected site status limits excavation, so the team cannot freely open the formation and remove material. The planned 2025 to 2026 core drilling is the next controlled step. If it recovers organic material, radiocarbon dating could show whether the signal points near 5,000 years or belongs to a completely different timeline. Soil chemistry remains the proponent case's strongest specific point. The shape, the dimensions, and even the radar geometry can all be challenged by natural explanations, but a 3 times organic matter increase tied closely to the geometric outline is harder to wave away without site-specific analysis. The 38% potassium increase adds to that question. It does not prove the Ark, but it gives the investigation one clear unresolved datum. It has detected organized internal geometry, soil testing has found an unusual organic boundary, and marine fossils remain present at altitude. At the same time, the strongest published explanation still favors geology, not archaeology. The most honest conclusion is simple. The investigation is genuine, the evidence is real, and the answer is not yet in. Until the missing physical test is done, Durupinar stays unresolved. The most realistic answer does not confirm the Ark, and it does not erase the anomalies. Everything now depends on the core samples, because they could finally tell the site's age in a way radar never can. Gave the title its most credible form, not by proving an Ark, but by showing something beneath the surface that had to be examined. Alongside ERT, LiDAR, and 88-sample soil chemistry, the investigation entered Durupinar's subsurface profile at a level of resolution the site had not received before. The reported findings were specific: a 13-foot passageway, a 3-layer internal structure, a 3 times organic matter boundary, and marine fossils preserved in rock at 6,500 feet above sea level. Marine fossils are the most literal version of the something alive idea. They are not living creatures hiding inside the mountain, but coral and shells that once belonged to an ancient ocean, now frozen in stone at 6,500 feet. At Durupinar, that biological clue sits beside soil chemistry that differs sharply from the land immediately around it. The question is whether this convergence reflects millions of years of normal geology or something the present evidence cannot yet fully explain. Radiocarbon dating is the one test that could move the case beyond interpretation. It would require core drilling into the formation and testing any organic material recovered from the passageway or from soil taken inside the detected interior structure. But Turkey's protected site status prevents open excavation, and the drilling results have not been published. Without that physical sample, the investigation can identify patterns, but it cannot yet give the age that would decide the timeline. Mount Ararat claims have carried a serious pattern problem since the 1800s. Reports of beams, ship shapes, and buried remains have appeared many times, and many fell apart under closer testing. That history is why the current team's method matters. Non-destructive scanning before excavation and core drilling before any open dig is not just caution. It is a response to a field where belief has often moved faster than evidence at Durupunar. 88 soil samples showed a 3 times organic matter difference inside the formation boundary. The jar passageway sits 13 feet below the surface. The 3-layer structure remains part of the scan data, and the fossils remain visible at altitude. As the most careful ending would say, the evidence is real, but the final test is still missing. The core drilling planned for 2025 and 2026 is the step that could finally bring material from inside the formation, not just readings from above it. The investigation ends where the evidence currently ends, inside the formation, but not yet in the lab.